Hi, my name's Greta Carew-Johns. I'm talking with Pat today on Pop Culture with Pat.
Guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. So today's guest, I enjoyed by Greta Carew-Johns. We're going to be talking all things about, you've seen her in a number of different projects, including Escaping Denver, Meeting Mr. Christmas, The Pregnancy Scheme, and many more. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Greta.
Thanks for having me, Pat.
Of course. So one of the things I always like to ask guests, just to kind of like start off, I'm always interested in hearing how people got started, and everyone's story is different. And yours is, definitely different in particular, where, a lot of times I'll talk to guests and they're like, oh, from a young age, I went from like dancing and then I moved into acting. But I read that you had started later on. It was like in like college where you first started getting into acting. You were going to school. So can you just talk a little bit about that, how you got started? Why were you interested in acting in the first place?
Yeah. I took a bit of an unusual route, I suppose, to get there. The interest first sparked probably in grade 10. I was talking to my mum about this recently and doing interviews, and I was like, I don't know where it came from. It was just there. And she's like, no, it was your year 10 English oral presentation where we'd all had to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And what we had to do as the presentation was to pick a character and write sort of an inner monologue as the character at a certain point in the story. So I chose Scout, which is the daughter in it, and I had a costume and presented with a South American accent and, deep South sort of accent. And it just transported me somewhere else. I just really enjoyed it. And it was sort of that spark that was lit then. I didn't do drama in school. It was lit, but I didn't really know what to do with that. I wasn't really interested in doing anything about it at that time. Then I went on to university, college. I did my 2 degrees, and it was sort of, I think, the second last year of my degree and I've been thinking about lately what was the next sort of catalyst for wanting to be into it again. And speaking to one of my friends who I met in law school in the second last year, she was doing law and arts and she was doing acting. And I remember feeling a bit of a pang of jealousy that she was doing acting. I was doing commerce and law, thinking I was covering all bases of anything I could want to do. And I think it was around that time that I started looking into acting classes where I lived. And I loved it when I was there, but there was always like, I hope they cancel. Like there was that fear of going each time. And I think as I got older and kept doing that, I think I was like, if I'm so afraid of, there must be something there, putting yourself out there or something like that. And I just did lots of class, like any class I could get my hands on in Brisbane and Sydney and anywhere in Australia that I could find. I continued with my degrees because I was almost all the way through. So I was like, I'll finish.
Might as well complete them. Yeah.
Be a shame. Exactly. And I went on to become a lawyer for a few years. And I sort of put that acting to the side, but it just kept coming back. I had an agent and where I grew up and where I was practicing law in Brisbane, Australia, it doesn't have much of an industry. So maybe some commercials, and then there's a few things at the Gold Coast that go on, but a lot of those things are cast in America before they get there. So there wasn't a lot that I could pursue even on the side. And as you can imagine, a full-time lawyer's job doesn't allow a lot of time to pursue anything else as well. So it got to the point where I just was really unfulfilled in my job, and there were things I enjoyed about it, but generally speaking, I was unfulfilled, and there was just this gnawing desire to pursue acting. So I ended up leaving the law and I moved to Vancouver in Canada, to where there was a bit more of an industry, and haven't looked back.
And now you're here.
That's right.
Well, so yeah, like I said, it's always interesting to hear people's stories of, how they got to this point in their careers. So it's just something that, like you said, it was just something that was there, and it just kind of had been, festering, nagging at you for a little bit, calling you back.
Yes.
So that's really cool. Now, I read that working on Thor Ragnarok kind of solidified your pursuit to go after acting. So I was curious, what was it about that particular experience that I guess was like, this was something that I really want to do?
Uh, Part of it was just the pure excitement I felt to be involved in any sort of big project like that. So it was filmed at the Gold Coast. I lived in Brisbane, which is about an hour's drive. I was leaving at, I think, 4 in the morning or something. And for most people, they're like, oh my God, how terrible. I could not have been more excited to
Yeah.
be up and on that. I mean, I had the tiniest role, but it felt important to be on a project like that, to be around, the big name actors, the Chris Hemsworth within a lot of the scenes that I was in, and Tom Hiddleston and Jeff Goldblum and things like that, to actually be close to them, get to talk to them a couple of times and see how much they enjoyed their job. I remember thinking, that's where I want to be. I want to be where they are. And the massive sets and all the people involved and how much creativity is in there, and what a business it is, just really inspired me and made me want to chase it.
That's kind of similar for me. Like, trust me, I'm nowhere. I've only done like a couple like background extra like roles for a couple films. But
Yep,
it's
yep.
same thing for me. I've always been passionate about like movies, television since I was
Yeah.
really little. And over the past like several years, I've gotten to do some like extra roles in a couple films, and it's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, you work, even as like an extra, like you're on set for like 12, 14 hours or whatever, but and sometimes you're just sitting there and just watching most of the time, especially you're just sitting there watching some of these scenes play out. But it's just one of those things that if you're like, if you're really into this because you're just so excited to be there, like you said, and just be a part of this environment. So I know exactly what you're saying as far as that goes.
That's precisely right. There is a lot of sitting, whether you're the lead or an extra, there's a lot of waiting around. So the fact that you're not bored or irritated by that goes to show that you really want to be there, I think. And
Yeah.
For me, it's like that specifically was going behind the curtain. You're like inside the machine. And from that point, and then every role that I work on, I watch shows differently, because I think, oh, wow, I wonder how they shot that. I wonder where they were, or I bet they weren't. I bet they had no one in front of them, or it's just really interesting. The whole machinery of it is interesting to me. Acting is the most interesting, but I really enjoy all sides of it.
Yeah, one of the things I always kind of think to myself now whenever I'm watching like a film or a television show, just where I've done some of the extra roles, is I'm like,
Yeah,
I always look for the people in the background and I'm like, I wonder what you guys are talking about in the background, just because you
same.
have the most random conversations when you're doing those things.
And you're often like miming them or something.
Yeah.
And whether I've done some extra work a few years ago as well. And then even if you're a lead, sometimes when you're in the background coming into the scene, you have to do the same kind of thing. And it's so bizarre to just be like mouthing things. And the more you focus on those people when you're watching things, the odder it looks.
Oh
But
yeah.
if you're just focusing on sort of the people you're supposed to be focusing on, the ones that whoever's making the show wants you to focus on, it all seems normal. But it's
Yeah.
very funny to watch the background,
Yeah.
knowing what it's like being on set.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when you've had that experience for
that
sure.
experience. That's right.
So I figured, in the spirit of the holiday season, where we're
Mhm.
getting into that now, I've already on Halloween here. They already had like the Christmas commercials and stuff like that going. So I wanted to ask you about one of your most, recent projects, which you played a lead in Meeting Mr. Christmas. So can you just talk a little bit about, how that project came about and just working on that film? Because I always imagine it must be fun to work on a Christmas themed project.
It was good fun, and because in Australia we have a hot Christmas because we're in summertime, it was sort of so much more special to be working on something that has all the stereotypical snow, cold Christmas things. That's something that is still really exciting to me to be in the Northern Hemisphere during that time of year. So I was actually in Whistler skiing with my boyfriend and a friend at the time I got the audition, and I had to film the audition up there in an Airbnb. So it was a very I've got videos of the setup. Like I had tables on top of chairs, and I had my iPad sort of strapped to a thing so that my acting coach could play the other character. And then my boyfriend and my friend were holding up sort of a diffuser material so that the light wasn't too direct and you could see it in your eyes or anything. So it was this whole, she was on the couch and he was over there. It was this whole production, but for this bit that you send in, nobody would know. So it was perfect. So it was like a 12-page audition. It was the longest one I'd had. It was the first lead, I think one of the first lead auditions I'd had, I think. Anyway, so there was a little bit of pressure on it, but it was a lower budget one, and so it was something I really wanted to get my teeth into, because you need to sort of step with building blocks and getting into this Hallmark-esque sort of style world of TV movies that are made was something that I was interested in doing because it's such a good training ground. So a few days after that was submitted, we were actually on the ski lifts when I got an email from my agent saying, they want you, you're on hold. And so it was during sort of COVID time. And so there was really no one else around, but we just like screamed from the top of our lungs, because even if it's on hold and it wasn't locked in, like that means you're at the top and someone's considering you. So that was a really special moment for us. Then I started to worry about injuring myself on the skiing, because I was like, oh no, what if that happened? Anyway, that was a really special moment. So then it was filmed in Prince George, which is an hour and a half flight north from Vancouver. And by some miracle, it wasn't as cold as it usually is. It's usually like minus 20 Celsius up there during winter. And for some reason, it was nowhere near that when I went there. Maybe they knew the Australian was coming to town and couldn't handle it. But it's a small town, so it kind of had that feel that the character would be living in. The co-lead, Madison Smith, it's where he grew up just by chance. So that was kind of a nice, he was able to sort of tell me a little bit about the town. And I just loved every minute of it. After the first day, I remember thinking before I got there, I was like, what if I don't like this? Like, what if I don't like being a lead?
A little bit.
Yeah, and I was like, have I been doing this? But oh my God, the first day, I remember calling my boyfriend. I was just like, I love it. I love it. It's not like harder than I thought. Everything's just coming so easily. You spend weeks beforehand learning it all and preparing, and it just felt like I was meant to be in this world. Really, I'd had other roles before, but really for the first time, being a lead there's more pressure. You've got to carry the film, and you're in almost every scene. So there was the pressure on myself of would I be able to do that? And I just loved doing it. We had such a wonderful crew, director, and they just made it such a fun experience.
Which that's always nice, especially for your first time being in that position too.
Yeah, it was there wasn't as much snow as they were hoping, because it always snows up there. So for some scenes we had to there was literally some of the crew shoveling snow from further up the footpath to be in front of us. There was one scene where I have to drive, and I'd barely driven on the right-hand side of the road, and there was a bit of black ice, and I had to actually drive. And they were like, oh, there's a little bit of black ice, but just like pump the brake if it happens. And I was like, what? Yeah, cool. I was like, do we have insurance? So there was just lots of those little things that I didn't necessarily have the experience of purely from being from the other hemisphere, just those kind of things. But I just learned so much from all the cast and crew. And yeah, it was a really festive experience, even though we shot in February. They made it really, really great.
At least you had like some snow though, because I feel like a lot of times it seems a lot of these winter or even like, Christmas-based movies, sometimes they'll be shot like middle of the summer, like, here like in the US or even like Canada. It'll be like middle of the summer, so it's actually warm outside, and then you have to pretend that it's it's cold and snowing and you have a jacket on and everything. So
exactly,
at least you kind of had like a little bit of those elements like in there. So I'm sure that helped.
That's right. And it does help to not have to act cold when you're like dripping in perspiration. So we were very lucky in that sense. And it took that element away, that there was a lot of realness. We had to, we only did a couple of outside nighttime shoots that were very cold. But honestly, I was just so excited to be there that I didn't really notice how cold it was, but people noticed that I was just shivering, and I was like, I don't know. Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things that you have the like the adrenaline just kind of like takes over, and it powers,
Exactly.
you get through the day, you get through the night, and then like later that day or like that evening when you're starting to wrap up, you're like, oh, maybe it is actually a little bit colder than I thought it was, or I'm feeling a
That's
little
right.
bit more tired than I was at the beginning of the day, but it just kind of
Precisely.
like powers you through.
That's exactly right.
So to follow up, kind of just on the holiday stuff too, I wanted to ask you: is there any kind of like holiday traditions that you have every year? Are there any like certain movies, TV specials, anything like that that you have to do every holiday season, or no?
Uh, Trying to think. I think I always end up watching The Holiday and Love Actually.
Okay.
Um, I've got more into some of the Christmas films, kind of like Meeting Mr. Christmas, since moving here, but they're not as big of a thing in Australia, so I wasn't really aware of them as much. Certainly, those two films I always end up wanting to watch again. And traditions, we were stuck in Canada for a couple of years during COVID when the borders were shut in Australia. And we tried to make the most of that in getting into the traditions that we'd never come across, like the gingerbread houses and
Oh, yeah.
decorating, things like that. That's not really a big thing in Australia. I'd seen it in movies and things like that. So we really jumped headfirst into that. I tend to eat as I go, so it doesn't end up being this beautiful thing. But I really like doing that. It's sort of, I'm not very artistic, but getting your hands in and doing something is just something rewarding about that.
Yeah, you
And
just gotta
then
have
having
fun.
like a sugar high is, and then the crash. But doing that and watching sort of holiday movies is something I now really enjoy, having not experienced that before. When I'm at home in Australia, which I will be this year for Christmas, we tend to do like a little bit of a Christmas breakfast with pancakes and things. We try not to eat too much, but often end up doing it because we try
Yeah,
not to eat too much at breakfast because we're having Christmas lunch, but
it's the
whatever
holidays.
happens.
Yeah,
And then often, I think we're having it at my parents' place this year as well. We do the big, even though it's hot down there, we still do the big glazed ham and turkey and things like that, which I've never enjoyed more than in the Northern Hemisphere. I really like it here. Christmas, it was always like, yeah, that's what you do at Christmas. But it makes so much more sense here in the cold,
yeah, for sure. No,
which is fun.
that's exciting that you got to kind of partake in some of those different traditions that we have, like here. Yeah, I know, like for like myself, like I always, ever since I was a kid, I always like to go around and look at like all the Christmas lights that are set up.
Yes.
People set those up. Though it's always nice to see some of the displays because some people go way out. I do
They,
myself for Halloween, I go like all out, but Christmas don't have necessarily as much, but it's fun to see all of that. And then I always have to watch things like Jingle All the Way with like Arnold
mm-hmm.
Schwarzenegger, the Home Alone movies, and different
Yes,
things
yes,
like that. That's always like a have to do it like every holiday season.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So now another project of yours, Greta, that I wanted to ask you about was where you play the voice of Sara in Escaping Denver. So how did that project come about where it's a scripted podcast, a little bit different from some of the other stuff, all the live action acting that you've done? So how did that come about? And how did it just kind of compare doing, the voice work versus, films and different things like that?
Mm-hmm. So one of the creators of the show and also the other lead, Brady, he plays Noah. He came up to me at the gym in Vancouver, and we'd known each other for a little while, knew that each other were actors, and he was creating this scripted podcast and said, "Do you want to audition for this role?" And I was like, as every actor, absolutely, please, can I? Desperation comes out. So initially, I read for it in an American accent, which is what I do almost all my auditions in. And then they came back to me and said, we like it, but can you do it in your natural Australian accent? So I was like, okay, sure. And they loved that. And I was slightly disappointed because I was like, oh, I want a chance to practice my American. But they found that sort of more interesting, and it allowed them to add lots of different accents throughout the show. And I think they were always going to have different languages, but they then decided to spread it to accents as well, to make it seem like there was people from all over the world underground.
Yeah.
And as to how it compares, there's in some ways less pressure. Like you don't have to have hair and makeup. You can go in the sweats and your hair up in a bun, and you can be the character, which is a more relaxing thing, I suppose, to do. On the other hand, on that same point, sometimes it helps you to get into the character when you're in their wardrobe and have your hair and makeup done. So that's sort of another thing. However, I don't think Sara is going through this situation she's in this labyrinth with hair and makeup done. So probably in sweats was fine.
Yeah.
It's initially was slightly more difficult because so much of it is your imagination of what you can see. But within the first one or two recording sessions, the writer, Mike, he has such a vivid imagination of what he is writing and what he visualizes. He was able to explain that to us so well that before or after we'd done a take which wasn't quite hitting, he'd say, no, so this is what you're seeing, and explain it all in such detail that I was
really helpful.
Got it. So, and now he's actually started to, I think it's on the Escaping Denver Instagram, they've started using the AI tool where you can type in descriptions of what you want in a picture and paint it. So he's done a lot of that, which now brings visuals to what you might be seeing if you were in our position as the characters. So I'm loving looking at that because I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I imagined, or wow, that's much bigger. So I'm in awe at his imagination and how he can create that. It's certainly a very fun process.
And that's something we were kind of talking about a little bit before too, that, I saw the news that it sounds like they're going to be taking this, and it's interesting the way that I was reading it, that it's going to be kind of jumping off. So it's not necessarily like remaking the podcast. It's kind of like jumping off from that. And these characters, they like, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Greta, but I believe that they like listen to the podcast, or they want to prove that the podcast, like, this actually happened or something like that. So it's in the same world. They're not just like reimagining everything and just saying, okay, well, this is the live action version versus like the podcast. So that's really cool.
I think that's right. I don't have a lot of details, but I think that's right. It's I'd love to see a live action version of exactly sort of what we did in the podcast, but I think they are going outside of the podcast and not recreating what's happening with the characters Noah and Sara. So I think that is correct. Yeah. So I mean, that creates a real world. I guess it's sort of like imagining what the narrator is going through. It's in the narrator's world versus in ours.
And I know probably you can't say too much about it if you have any details, but just maybe fingers crossed. So that way, if they're not recreating those characters, then maybe that leaves room for Sara to like maybe show up in the live action. Maybe you could play the live action version of the character.
Fingers crossed. I don't know yet, but yeah, that'd be great.
So
I'll send this podcast to the creators.
Yeah, there you go. Now, and from doing this experience, has this kind of opened up a new thing where maybe you want to do more like voice acting or podcasting work like in the future now that you've done it?
Yes, I was doing some voiceover work, more corporate sort of work. But now I've really started spending a lot more time specifically with a voiceover coach to learn the different types of, there's a lot of animation that requires voiceover and commercials that require voiceover. So I'm sort of dipping my toe into that world, which is different to a scripted podcast because it's not actually a voiceover for the fact that it's not paired with visual.
Yeah.
But using my voice is certainly something that is more interesting. I think it can help with my acting as well. And that's something I've been looking at a bit more this year specifically when the industry's been at a bit of a slowdown. So and that did spark my interest. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah, it's definitely it's a whole. I've never done it like anything like that, like myself. But from what I've heard, it's a whole new world doing voice acting and things like that because you're not able to show your emotions or anything like that with a visual. You have to use your voice to express that with these characters and stuff like that. So it's a lot different, and I imagine can be challenging but fun at the same time.
Totally. I quite naively assumed that I can act, so I'll just put my voice on it. But it's so much. It's almost overacting in a way to be able to just hear the voice doing it. So I would hazard a guess that theatre actors might be better at voiceover if they'd not done it before, just because they have to project more, they have to be bigger to show a whole audience this, whereas film and TV actors, we can be much, much smaller because you can do a really close-up shot to get the emotion or whatever. So I have been learning how much I might, on a screen, I might give like just a tiny little smile and the audience knows what's happening. For a voiceover, you really have to be smiling this big to be able to hear the smile in it. So there's all these little sort of intricate things that I'm learning that, it is a whole new world that's it's kind of fascinating as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just for yourself, where you kind of discovered or started acting like a little bit later on in life, do you have any advice for any other like aspiring actors that you would tell them if they're looking to get into this profession?
I think the number one thing, I mean, people told me this, but now I have learnt it myself. Sometimes you can't be told. It's not too late, and you don't have to wait for the perfect time. People might laugh when I say it's not too late. No, I'm not 70 or something changing, but I was in a different career. So sometimes you think you must stay true to the path. Life is a risk. Everything is a risk. So if it's important to you, I'd encourage you to take the risk. Have things in place for how you will live. Don't just sell your house and live on the street to do this. Be sensible about it, but have a go. So many people say to me, "Oh, I could never do that. So brave." And I didn't see it as brave at the time. Now I look back and think, what was I thinking? How did I do that? But you've just got to throw yourself into it, whatever it is. Just take a calculated risk and do it.
Yeah, because you never know what's going to happen unless you actually try it, yourself. Because otherwise,
Right.
You might have that regret, later down the line and be like, maybe I should have tried.
Exactly. You can die wondering, but we're like, what's the good of that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, Greta, to wrap things up, is there anything else that you wanted to say to fans about any of your different projects? And then also, where can fans just keep up with your work, as far as like social media and stuff like that goes?
I'd love to say thanks for watching the things that I've been in, most recently the pregnancy scheme on Lifetime. And thank you for listening to Escaping Denver. The season 3 just came out end of October, I believe. There's lots more things to come in this season without giving anything away. And we'll be looking towards season 4, I'd imagine, next year, but I have no details whatsoever on that, so I can't even try to give you a spoiler or anything like that. But yeah, that'll be probably the next thing I'm working on. If I'm alive at the end of the season, who knows?
Yeah, I know you guys got to stay tuned and check it out to see what happens next. And
Exactly.
As far as like social media wise, are you like
Oh
Instagram,
yes.
Twitter, different things like that?
I'm primarily just on Instagram at Greta.Carew-Johns, all one word, and that's where I will post anything that's coming up, any podcasts that I'm in, any interviews that I have. That's generally where they'll be, and yeah, love if you could follow along.
Perfect. Well, hey, Greta, thank you so much. It was great talking to you about, some of your different projects that you've done and just getting to talk to, say, even though I don't really consider myself an actor, but just sharing some of those experiences.
You are.
Being on set. It was fun, kind of talking that behind the scenes stuff with you. So thank you so much again for coming on the show. You are welcome back anytime in the future. And, good luck. Can't wait to see what's next for you.
Thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate your time. Hi, my name's Greta Carew-Johns. I'm talking with Pat today on Pop Culture with Pat.